The city is running on roughly 5% of electricity. There is no water. That is the World Food Programme's director for Madagascar, Tanya Gusens, describing Toamasina, the country's second largest city, days after Cyclone Gezani tore through it. Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, late afternoon. Toamasina sits on Madagascar's eastern coastline, a port city of 400,000 people pressed against the Indian Ocean. Markets are winding down for the day, fishing boats sit pulled up on the sand, and families across the city are settling in for the evening. Schools have been shut since morning. The Weather Service has posted red alerts, but the storm is still out there, somewhere over open water, and the evening feels almost calm. At around 4 p.m. local time, Gazani makes landfall. The eye passes directly over the city. Eye winds hit 250 kilometers per hour. That is 155 miles per hour. A Category 3 equivalent hurricane slamming into a coastline where over 70% of homes are built from clay, branches, and foliage. Within 24 hours, 41 people are dead, 427 injured, and more than 18,000 homes have been destroyed, with another 37,000 damaged on top of that. 75% of the city gone, and 250,000 people across the region left reeling from a storm that has not hit Toamasina this hard since 1994. That one killed 231. Gazani is only the second cyclone to strike Madagascar in 10 days. It starts with sound. Not a gradual build. A wall of noise that arrives all at once, like someone has opened a door into a jet engine. The wind doesn't whistle through Toamasina. It screams. Corrugated metal roofing sheets, the material that covers most of the city, start vibrating in their frames, rattling like something alive is trying to rip them free. Because something is. Harimanga Ranaivo, a Toamasina resident, told Reuters he had never experienced winds this violent. His doors and windows are metal, and they are being shaken so hard he can feel the vibrations through the floor. Metal doors and metal frames, and even those are losing. Then the roofs go, not one at a time. Across entire neighborhoods, sheets of corrugated iron peel away from homes and launch into the air at over 100 miles per hour. They become blades. Trees snap at the trunk or rip straight out of the ground, root systems and all, and crash across roads and into houses. Walls, solid, like concrete walls, buckle and collapse inward onto the families still inside. One resident managed to reach AFP by phone during a brief gap in the communications blackout. Their description was direct. Roofs have been blown off, floors are flooded, and the walls of solid houses have collapsed around the people inside. Then they added the line that strips away any comfort. And I'm talking about the nice neighborhoods with well-built houses. Think about that for a second. The well-built homes failed. Over 70% of houses in Madagascar are constructed from clay, branches, or foliage, materials that cannot survive a strong tropical storm, let alone a cyclone pushing 250 km/h gusts. For those families, the house does not just fail, it becomes the danger. Walls turn to projectiles and roofs become weapons, and then the lights die. Power lines snap across the city and Toamasina goes dark. Not a flicker, not a brownout. Total blackout. 400,000 people plunged into darkness, while the strongest cyclone in 32 years tears their city apart around them. Phones cut out and cell towers fail. The only calls getting through are fragments. Seconds of connection before the signal drops again. The city disappears. Wednesday morning, February 11th. The wind has stopped. Gazani has weakened to a tropical storm and is grinding westward across the island, passing roughly 100 kilometers north of the capital. Red alerts for flooding remain active across multiple provinces. But in Toamasina, the immediate violence is over. Residents step outside. And what they find is a city they do not recognize. All drone footage released by BNGRC, Madagascar's Disaster Management Office, shows the scale from above. flattened buildings stretching block after block, corrugated metal sheets scattered across streets like confetti, tangled with downed trees and power lines. Entire neighborhoods submerged under brown floodwater, trees stripped completely bare, their trunks snapped or ripped from the earth and left lying across roads in every direction. Some areas look like a bomb went off. Others look like nothing was ever there at all. On the ground, families wade through knee-deep water carrying whatever they managed to grab. Children hoisted onto shoulders, a bag of clothing clutched under one arm, and not much else. The streets that are passable are choked with debris, branches, roofing material, chunks of concrete wall. Humanitarian workers begin clearing roads by hand, working through the night under headlamp light because there is still no electricity. The numbers start landing and they do not stop climbing. BNGRC's first count on Wednesday, 20 dead. By Wednesday night, 31. By Thursday, 36. 6 people still missing. 374 injured. The final toll will reach 41, with 32 of those deaths concentrated in the Toamasina area alone, most of them caused by building collapses, walls falling on families who had no time and nowhere to go. Then the infrastructure numbers. 17,980 homes destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. Another 37,000 damaged and nearly 12,000 flooded. 600 classrooms are gone. Commercial flights have been suspended, and the roads leading in and out of the city are either impassable or blocked by collapsed bridges. An aid worker told AFP the situation bluntly. Many zones remain completely inaccessible to rescue teams. Bridges are down, roads are destroyed. There's no way in and no way out. And Toamasina is Madagascar's main port, the country's economic artery to the outside world. This is not a remote village. This is a city of 400,000 that has just lost 3/4 of everything it had. Let me put a number on what 75% destruction actually looks like, because the figure is easy to say and almost impossible to absorb. President Colonel Michael Randrianarina traveled to Toamasina before the cyclone even made landfall. He stood with residents as the storm approached, and after surveying the aftermath, his assessment was blunt. Nearly 75% of the city was destroyed. Days later, the World Food Program revised that figure upward. 80%. 8 out of every 10 structures in a city of 400,000 people damaged or destroyed in a single night. Do the math on that. 80% of 400,000 is 320,000 people whose homes, schools, workplaces, or hospitals no longer function. That is roughly the entire population of a city like Cincinnati or Nice, wiped off the infrastructure map between Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning. And here is a detail that tells you everything about the depth of this crisis. The World Food Program's own office in Toamasina was destroyed. Their warehouse, the building holding the emergency food stocks meant to feed survivors, was destroyed with it. The organization responsible for feeding 250,000 displaced people could not even protect its own supplies. Now look at the systems that keep a city alive. Toamasina is running on 5% of its electrical capacity. 5%. That means 95 out of every 100 lights, refrigerators, water pumps, ventilators, and charging stations are dead. Families with infants, elderly residents with medical needs, hospital wards that depend on power for everything from lighting to oxygen, all of it running on almost nothing. And the water system has failed completely. No running water in a tropical city where temperatures sit above 30 degrees Celsius and floodwater is mixing with sewage in the streets. From the air, AFP photos show what that looks like in practice. Streets buried under twisted metal and fallen trees. Humanitarian workers clearing debris by headlamp because there's nothing else to see by. Every building in the drone footage carries visible structural damage. Roofs peeled back like opened cans, interiors exposed to the sky, walls sheared clean off their foundations. But the damage does not end at the city limits. BNGRC confirmed widespread destruction across the broader Atsinanana region, and their assessments are still ongoing. Rivers across Madagascar remain under flood alert: the Betsiboka, the Ivandro, the Rianila, and at least 8 others. Communities along every one of those waterways have been told to take immediate precautions. The damage map is still growing, and every day it expands, the numbers get worse. Within hours of the storm clearing Toamasina, President Randrianirina declared a national disaster. His statement to the international community carried no diplomatic cushioning. The current situation exceeds Madagascar's capabilities alone. That is the leader of a country standing in the wreckage of his second-largest city, telling the world he cannot fix this without help. And there is a detail here worth pausing on. Randrianirina took power in a military coup in October 2025. Gazani is his first major crisis. He could have monitored this from the capital, 200 kilometers away. Instead, he traveled to Toamasina before the cyclone made landfall, positioning himself in the direct path of the storm alongside the residents he now governs. Whatever else you want to say about the politics, the man was on the ground when everything fell apart. The international response began moving quickly. France deployed rescue teams and food supplies from Reunion Island, roughly 1,000 kilometers across the Indian Ocean. China pledged $14.5 million in aid. The United Nations had already released $3 million from its emergency fund before Gazani even touched land. They saw the forecasts and knew what was coming. The WFP went further, distributing anticipatory cash assistance to 11,000 of the most vulnerable households ahead of the storm. First time the mechanism had ever been activated in Madagascar. Families used it to buy food, secure belongings, and brace for impact. But here is where the math breaks down. After those initial emergency actions, the WFP's remaining food stocks came down to fortified biscuits and rice. That is what is left to distribute across 250,000 affected people. Their Madagascar director, Tanya Goosens, said it plainly. The needs on the ground far exceed their current capacity. Beyond the emergency response already in motion, there's no funding available for a cyclone recovery operation. None. On the ground, 16,300 people are registered across 45 temporary shelter sites. But displaced is a word that dramatically undercounts what is actually happening. Over 257,000 people are classified as affected. Many of those families are sleeping inside the damaged shells of their own homes, not because the structures are safe, but because there is simply nowhere else. The shelters are full, the roads to reach additional sites are blocked, and the resources to build new ones have not arrived yet. 45 sites, 16,000 registered, or 250,000 still waiting for someone to count them. And this is the bottleneck that will define the coming weeks. An aid worker told AFP that large sections of the impact zone remain completely cut off. Bridges have collapsed and roads are destroyed across the zone. The WFP director confirmed the situation beyond Toamasina's city limits is actually worse than inside the city, and the city itself is 80% destroyed. The supplies to help these communities exist somewhere in the world. The routes to deliver them do not. Let me come back to Harimanga Ranaivo. He is the resident who told Reuters his metal doors and windows were being violently shaken during the storm. The man who said he had never experienced winds like that in his life. His quote reached the outside world because he happened to get through to a journalist during one of those brief windows when communications flickered back. But here is what we do not know about Harimanga. We do not know if his home survived. We do not know if his family is safe. We do not know if he is among the 16,000 in shelters or the 257,000 classified as affected but uncounted, sleeping in the remains of whatever is left standing. That uncertainty is not a gap in the reporting. That uncertainty is the story. Right now, the majority of people in Toamasina exist in exactly that limbo. Alive, but with no clear picture of what comes next. Then there was the anonymous resident who reached AFP by phone on Tuesday night. The one who described the destruction and then added the line that should keep you up at night. And I'm talking about the nice neighborhoods with well-built houses. That single sentence carries an enormous weight because it dismantles the assumption that proper construction equals safety. If reinforced concrete walls collapsed in the wealthy parts of the city, what happened in the parts where homes are made from clay and woven branches? Those families do not have phones to call journalists. They do not appear in wire reports. They're invisible in the coverage, and they're almost certainly the ones who suffered most. Over 70% of Madagascar's 31 million people live in homes built from materials that cannot withstand a serious storm. Not a cyclone, a storm. These are families who know, every single November through April, that cyclone season could take everything. And for 250,000 of them this week, it did. Now multiply the grief by 2, because Gazani was not the first hit. Tropical Cyclone Fytia struck northwestern Madagascar on January 31st, just 10 days earlier. That storm killed 14 people and displaced 85,000. Emergency shelters were already occupied. Responders were already deployed. Supplies were already running thin. And then Gazani arrived on the opposite coast, demanding the same resources from a country that had already emptied its reserves for the first disaster. 2 cyclones, 10 days, one country that was already struggling before either one hit. 600 classrooms were destroyed or severely damaged by Gazani. That number represents tens of thousands of children across the Atsinanana region whose schools simply no longer exist. In a country where educational infrastructure was already fragile, where attendance rates dropped sharply in rural areas and many schools were built from the same vulnerable materials as the homes around them, losing 600 classrooms does not just disrupt a semester. It can set an entire generation of children back years. And for the older residents of Toamasina, there is a specific cruelty to this moment that the statistics cannot capture. Cyclone Geralda hit this exact city in February 1994. It destroyed 80% of Toamasina. It killed 231 people across Madagascar. Families rebuilt. They raised children in those rebuilt homes. They sent those children to rebuilt schools. And 32 years later, they watched the same streets, the same walls, the same rooftops get ripped apart by a storm following almost the same track at almost the same intensity. One generation to rebuild, one night to lose it again. So why was the destruction this extreme? The wind speed alone does not explain 18,000 homes destroyed. The answer sits in the collision between a powerful storm and a country that was never built to absorb one. Gazani formed over the Indian Ocean and intensified rapidly as it tracked toward Madagascar's eastern coastline. By the time it reached Toamasina, it was carrying sustained winds of roughly 195 kilometers per hour, with gusts peaking at 250. The eye, the dead center of the storm, ringed by the most violent winds, passed directly over the city. France's CMRS Cyclone Center on Réunion Island confirmed it. Toamasina's port took a direct hit from the most intense part of the system. In cyclone terms, that is the worst possible outcome. You do not get hit by the edge, you do not catch the weaker side, you sit inside the engine. But here is the part that turns a bad storm into a catastrophe. A Category 3 equivalent cyclone is survivable, if the buildings can take it. Toamasina's could not. Over 70% of homes across Madagascar are constructed from clay, branches, or foliage. Most lack reinforced foundations. Roofs are sheets of corrugated metal held down by their own weight and sometimes a few nails. When gusts hit 250 kilometers per hour, those sheets do not just lift off. They launch. They become steel projectiles tearing through streets at highway speed. Walls built from clay dissolve. Wooden frames snap and collapse inward. The home does not shelter the family inside. It attacks them. That is the equation. A Category 3 cyclone hitting a housing stock that cannot survive a Category 1. And Madagascar keeps getting hit. More than a dozen cyclones or major tropical storms have struck the island since 2020 alone. The frequency is climbing, the intensity is increasing, and every time a storm passes through, it strips away a layer of infrastructure that was never fully rebuilt from the last one. After crossing Madagascar, Gazani weakened over land, but forecasters warned it would re-intensify over the warm waters of the Mozambique Channel. By Friday, it slammed into Inhambane, Mozambique, winds at 215 kilometers per hour. At least 4 more people killed, 13,000 left without power, and water supplies cut across the region. The storm that broke Toamasina on Tuesday is still killing people in another country 5 days later. As of the latest reports, 41 people are confirmed dead across Madagascar, 427 injured, 6 still missing. Over 16,000 families are registered in 45 temporary shelter sites, but 250,000 people remain classified as affected, and real assessments across the Atsinanana region are still incomplete. The numbers are not finished growing. President Randrianarina's priority list after visiting Toamasina was not about long-term planning or policy reform. It was 3 items: food, basic necessities, and building materials. That is where this country stands right now. Survival supplies, today, not tomorrow. The WFP has admitted openly that their capacity is exhausted. The needs dwarf what they can deliver. And beyond the emergency stocks already in motion, there is no funding allocated for a cyclone recovery operation. None. Cyclone season in the southwest Indian Ocean runs until April. It is mid-February. There's no budget and no reserves left, and 2.5 months of storm season still to go. Toamasina has been leveled twice in 32 years. The same city, the same coastline, the same families rebuilding the same walls and the same path of the same storms. And right now, tonight, those families are waiting, in shelters, in wreckage, in the dark, for whatever comes next.